Hi, we're going to make a basic Live2D list, starting with drawing and splitting up the art, and then rigging all the facial features and the XYZ rotations. I'll also try to explain some features of Live2D, which will be useful for any further rigs you make. Okay, to start with you'll need an art program, preferably one with a symmetry tool. I'm using FileAlpaca because it's free and relatively easy to pick up. I encourage you to draw one of your own characters for this, although I'll also be providing my own files for reference. Since this is likely going to be your first Live2D rig, it's okay if you don't put too much effort in on the art. You can start out your drawing as usual, but you want to finish with each part split up individually and merged. For this project, I'm splitting up the layers like this. Make sure to name each layer. Normally I'll group related layers together, e.g. the hair pieces, and set the draw order on Live2D, but for this project I'm ignoring draw order and just pre-ordering the layers. I'm also going to be getting rid of some duplicate mirrored parts here. This isn't a strictly necessary step, but it helps with saving time by reflecting over symmetrical parts, which I'll discuss later. Once you're done drawing everything and have merged each part into a single layer, you'll want to export it as a PSD. Most art programs have this functionality, as PSD files are de facto standard. You can then just drag and drop the PSD onto Live2D editor to import it as a new Live2D project. Okay, now an overview of the parts of the editor we'll be using. The parts hierarchy shows the art meshes and folders in your project, and lets you reorder them. The Deformer hierarchy looks like the parts hierarchy, but it is mainly for showing parent-child relations of deformers. Down here is the parameter view. This is where the rigging information will be created and set. The inspector just shows some options based on whatever you currently have selected. And this area here is the model view. It's where you'll be doing most of the actual editing. There's also these tool buttons across the top, which we'll be using later. Alright, the very first thing you'll want to do is generate proper meshes for each art mesh in the project. Select everything, then click on this Auto button, and choose the standard mesh preset. We're now ready to add rigging. We're going to go down the list of parameters here, and do each one in order. Let's start with the left eye open/close. The eye I've made here has got 3 eyelash parts, an eye white, a shadow, an iris, and an eye shine. First, let's click on eye white and check its ID value. Then let's select the iris, eye shine, and eye shadow. Type in the eye white's ID into the box that says clipping, and hit enter. This will make those parts clip onto the eye white. Now for the actual eye rigging, we're going to start with the top eyelash. Select it, and then on the parameter view, click this button with the 2 green dots. This creates 2 keyforms for the eyelash top on the IL open parameter. Keyforms are basically start and end positions for an object's movements. The eye is already open, so the point on the right is already finished. We just need to move the eyelash pieces for the closed position, and then the program will automatically interpolate between our keyforms. Do note that once you've added keyforms to an object, you'll no longer be able to freely reposition it, as the movement will only apply to the currently selected keyform. As a note, there's multiple ways to move things around, but for this part we'll be using Deform Path and Deform Brush. Deform Paths basically let you move things like Bezier curve control points, while Deform Brush is like Liquify in an art program, letting you smudge things around. Anyway, for this eyelash piece, I'm going to use the Deform Path with some additional use of Deform Brush. Basically just do whatever it takes to get that eyelash into a closed position for the 0.0 keyform. How I'm doing it here is pulling the middle down with the Deform Path, and then adjusting with the Deform Brush. Move the slider to check that the movement is smooth. You may want to add extra points at e.g. 0.2 to adjust how it looks as well. Once you're finished with the top eyelash, go ahead and keyform these other parts here for the IL open parameter. After that's done, we can go ahead and do the eyeball XY. Now, we could keyform the iris directly, but then we would have to move the eye shine separately when it'll have a really similar movement. Luckily, we can use something called a deformer here. It's basically just a box, and when moved, things inside the box will move too. Select the iris and eye shine together, and then click this button on top to add a new warp deformer as their parent. You'll notice that this added a new little thing in the deformer hierarchy view. Now go ahead and create eyeball X and Y keyforms on the deformer with the 3 dots button. This time, the keyform in the middle of each parameter will be the starting position. Movements for this can be kept really simple. Just slide the box sideways for X and up and down for Y. Now, you might notice that if you move both the X and Y to the max range of the parameters, you don't get a diagonal combined movement. This is because Live2D doesn't automatically generate the corners for you, in case you want to set them manually. To auto-generate them, use the built-in function here called Synthesize Corners. Next we'll do the brow parameters. For this project, I'll just delete all the parameters besides the brow left and right Y. Add 3 keyforms for brow L, Y, then move the brow down and inward for -1 and up and outward for 1. Now for the mouth form and mouth open. Form is basically frown, neutral, smiling. For mouth open, it's just open and closed. Start with the lower lip and assign 2 keyforms to mouth open, then set the 0, 0 keyform for the closed position. For the upper lip, do a frown for the negative value and some kind of smile for the positive value. Assign some keyforms for the lower lip's mouth form parameter as well, and adjust it to fit the mouth shapes. Make sure to do the mouth insides open in form as well, so it doesn't leak out. For the teeth, you can just set them to clip to the mouth inside. Next up is the cheek. Just set 2 keyforms and then make the 0, 1 go to 0% opacity. If you forgot to draw a blush like I often do, you can just add it into your PSD and re-import. Good job! You're basically already halfway done. There's just the hair physics and ears, and then the XYZ rotations. Before we start, hit Ctrl 1 to reset the keyform positions back to their default values. For the back hair, I just put some basic rotation on hair moved back. For the front hair, I pushed it into shape with the Deform brush. If you notice something like this, you can add an extra point in between and adjust, or use extended interpolation. Okay, the physics is rigged now, but it won't move by itself. We need to set an input and output in the physics window. Add a new physics group, and name it Hair. Use presets Head Input and Hair Long. Go to the Output Settings tab, click Add at the top, and choose the hair physics parameters for the output. To keep it simple, we'll do it all on the same physics group instead of separating them. To test that it's working, you can click and move your mouse around in the preview on the right side of the window. Since this character is a furry, I'm also going to create 2 custom parameters for the left and right ears. These can be paired in a VTurbo program to inputs like eyebrows or smiling. Select the left ear and add a rotation deformer. Hold Ctrl and drag it to the base of the ear, then drag the tip to be rotated in line with the ear as well. Click Freeze Rotation and then assign keyforms to ear L at -30 and 30 degrees. Do all this for the other ear as well. Before we start the XYZ rotations, we're going to copy over some symmetrical parts. Select all the eye parts, including the iris and eyeshine deformer, and the eyebrow, then hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, and delete the deformer of position adjusting. After this, you still need to reflect it across the center, change left parameters to right, and reflect the X keyforms. Click on the modeling dropdown, then edit form and reflect. This will reflect the object across the center of the canvas, or if it's on a warp deformer, across the center of that. To move existing keyforms from one parameter to another, right-click the keyform bar and click Change, then select the destination parameter. Reflect in the keyform right-click menu will flip the X keyform around. Check that the layer ordering in the parts hierarchy is correct, since when you copy-paste objects, it dumps them in whichever folder you had selected at the time. Okay, it's finally time for the rotations on XYZ. Let's start with a quick refresher on perspective. When an object turns to the side, the front is exposed less, while the side gets exposed more. This also applies to up and down rotations. Go ahead and start with the head base. We'll make a 9x9 warp deformer here, in case you want to add chin movement to the mouth motion later. You can pull the green handles to move the deformer if you want. Personally, I never use those. I just use the Deform brush or select a group of vertices instead. For X, we'll slide it over, squash the side in, and pull the forehead and chin out a bit. Once you've done one side, you don't have to repeat the other side, since this movement is happening across the center axis. Click this hamburger icon and select Reflect Motion. Make sure you have the keyform selected that you want to reflect. For the Y angles, we'll do something like this. When you're done, do Synthesize Corners. If your character has face patterns, you might need to adjust the movement of that as well. Here's what I did for my project. Next, I like to do the nose. Just slide it around with the head base movement for X and Y, along with shrinking it for downward Y. It's a decent reference for positioning the other objects. Following this is the eyes. Put all the left and right eye parts, except the iris eyeshine and their deformers, into a single warp deformer. For X, we'll squash the far eye and push the bottom outward, then slide the close eye over slightly and widen it. For Y down, just push it down and squash the whole thing a bit. For Y up, move it slightly and use Deform brush to squish it up in the middle. We also need to move the iris and eyeshine along with the head. Make a deformer for both the L and R parts and just slide it around so that it always looks like it's looking at the viewer. For the eyebrows X movement, put both eyebrows in a warp deformer. For X, slide the eyebrows to be lined up with the eye sockets and squash the far one horizontally. For the Y movement, just move them up and down with the eye sockets. When making the deformer for the mouth XY, make sure it covers the entire potential area for mouth movements. for X, we'll slide it over, squash the far half inward, then pull the bottom inward as well. For the downward Y movement, slide it down, make the mouth a little smaller, and squash it vertically. For the upward Y movement, slide it upward. You want to check while working on this to make sure that the mouth stays on the face for the downward angles. If it doesn't stay on the face, make the squashes more pronounced, or push the chin out on the head base XY movement. Ear movement. Make a new rotation deformer for each ear. I usually rotate one down and the other one upward for the X movement, along with sliding them a bit. For the Y movement, just move them up and down with the head. For the front hair XY, make a new deformer. Then for X, slide it with the head movements if necessary. Also, squash when turning away and widen when getting closer. This part may require some manual adjustment. For the Y movement down, lengthen it a bit. Move it with the head, and squash it a bit for the upward movement. Do inverted XY movements on a new deformer for the back hair. Slide it around for XY and rotate a bit for X. The last part needing XY movement is the blush. A simple way to do this is to just throw it in with the head base XY deformer, but you can make another deformer and assign keyforms for it if you want. For head Z motion, I usually just put every head part in a rotation deformer, and then rotate the head -30 degrees left and 30 degrees right. Now for a simple breathing motion. For this, we'll just put a warp deformer on the torso and pull it up a bit. Add another deformer for the head, and move it up slightly with the breathing parameter as well. For the body XY movement, I'll skip Y and just do X. Add a deformer and squish the far side, along with sliding it around a little. Make another deformer for the head as well, and move it along with the torso. For body Z, we're gonna do basically the same thing as head Z. Just put the entire rig inside a rotation deformer, and rotate it left and right a bit, 15 degrees. At this point, the rig is nearly done. However, before you can export and use it, you need to make a texture page. Click the Texture Atlas button. Set the size of the atlas to be 2048 by 2048 and hit OK. To add all the parts to the Texture Atlas at once, click the one at the very top, then scroll down and shift double click the one at the bottom. This will dump all the parts unceremoniously onto the texture page. Then click Automatic Layout, set the % scale, and hit OK. The editor program will automatically place every part, although it isn't very smart or efficient about its placement, so you might have to put in and resize some parts manually. Make sure none of the parts' borders are touching. Now you're ready to export your model for VTubing. Click File on the upper left, then Export for Runtime, export as Mach 3. Hit OK on the dialog windows until it starts exporting. Then when it's done, you can drop it into your VTuber program model folder. That's it for this tutorial of a Live2D bust model. As a note, I didn't do best Live2D practices in this tutorial, as it was meant to just help people make their first finished model. If you have any questions or need help with parts, feel free to leave a comment. Good luck with rigging!